there's a lot of unknown factors, and that's really what this boils down to. Is this is not a fact. This is an opinion that I read about, but the whole thing is you have to be aware of when other people voice their opinions, because the market doesn't move off of one person, it moves off of a group. And this is something that, while Bitcoin has never been utilized yet as gold, it is constantly being referred to as the next gold, the digital gold. And so there is a question of when is Bitcoin going to be seen as different from the rest of altcoins? When is Bitcoin going to be seen as something that you can hedge against inflation and you can invest in to protect yourself? And so the theory, that thought that has been put place by others, again, this wasn't my thought, I'm just regurgitating, is that potentially could this be one of the leading factors in the future of splitting Bitcoin and altcoins? Because altcoins have a lot of technology, they have a lot of blockchain use cases, but they're more like equities. The way they work is more like equities. And traditionally, in times of war, equities go down about 15%. However, gold usually goes up. Bitcoin, up to this point, has been utilized mostly as an equity, but could this be the starting change to the way people view Bitcoin? Could we see institutions and whales who potentially, in this last year, who only got 4% gain in gold, start moving their frustrations and putting that money into Bitcoin, utilizing it as digital gold? It might not happen overnight, but this could be a stepping stone to that future concept.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that we understand that Bitcoin is very young. Bitcoin was mined first on January 3rd, 2009. It's a teenager right now. It's going through growth pains. You know, it's a little moody, kind of getting a little bit rebellious. That's what Bitcoin is doing. It just so happens that the analogy works very well. And I do think in the future, a lot of people are going to look to Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. And I do think a lot of people in the future are going to look to Bitcoin. And whenever they're scared of the traditional markets, they are going to move here and park their money here in the same way they do with gold. But I think the important thing that we have to remember is that Bitcoin is still a very young asset. And a lot of people still see it as very risky. The perception of the public is that Bitcoin is remarkably risky and that gold is remarkably safe. So even though they have a very similar functionality, because of their age, the public views them differently. So Smay, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Do you think that the public is going to see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation and a place that they want to park their money during times of conflict, or are they going to see Bitcoin as a very risky asset to be in and they would much prefer to hold on to their real estate or their stocks and their cash during times of uncertainty?
I mean, we are just not even, I don't even think we're there yet. Like, I was telling Tim when we were talking about this morning, we went to the gym. Honestly, there's not enough people that see Bitcoin in that light that we as the enthusiasts hold it in, right? It's still to a lot of people just a very volatile asset that can potentially make you a lot of money if you get in the right time, and that's about it. It's like, it's not seen as this, hedge against inflation or anything that we know it actually is, just because of the volatility and that it doesn't really work in a traditional market sense. It's not as safe. There's not a lot of regulatory clarity, all that stuff. So ultimately, in this, especially if we're looking at a conflict very soon here with what we're talking about with Russia and stuff like that. No, I really don't think that people are going to turn to Bitcoin right now, and that's why I think it's going to. My whole take on this is that I don't think this is going to turn into something extremely bearish, right? I don't think this is going to be something where people are dumping all their Bitcoin. But what I see this as is just and I'm not touching my mic, I promise. I see this as an opportunity that they're just going to continue to wait, right? People are going to continue to wait. Institutions are going to continue to wait to put their money in. They're going to keep it on the sideline until it's a little bit safer time to invest in their minds. So I think this just delays what we've already kind of seen as they're waiting for this regulatory clarity and all this stuff. I think this just pushes that even further. And now they're not just waiting for regulatory clarity, they're waiting for whatever happens with Russia. And that's going to determine what they do with investing in Bitcoin or not.
Yep. So let me give you a 30,000-foot perspective on what's going on with Russia, and then I'm going to talk about how I think this is going to help the cryptocurrency market to mature. Essentially what's going on is that Russia for a very long time has demanded that NATO not expand towards border states of Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine being some of those examples. But NATO has expanded to other nations in Eastern Europe. I believe Romania is a good example. Some other nations that, you might correct me on that if I'm wrong, but there's some other nations in Eastern Europe that NATO has brought into its circle of into the alliance France. And the reason that's so important is because there's a clause in NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, excuse me. There's a clause in NATO that an attack on one is an attack on all. So if you attack France, the United States joins that war. If you attack Britain, France joins that war. If you attack Germany, then America joins that war. So if Ukraine were to join NATO, then Russia would have no way of ever exercising their sphere of influence over Ukraine without literally starting World War III, because the entirety of NATO would declare war on Russia. So the reason that that's so important is because Russia wants to expand. They are an expansionist society, and they have been for a very long time. You can see that through the Soviet Union. In fact, even before the First World War, the Tsarist Russia, the empire, the Russian Empire, controlled much of Eastern Europe. They controlled modern-day Ukraine. They controlled, Belarus and Latvia and some of these other nations. They had control over the Baltics, and the fact is, they still want to have that. They had control over Kazakhstan as well. The Russian Empire used to be a lot larger than the Russian Federation is right now. And Putin is a dictator that came into play, I'll call him a president because that's the official term. He is a president that came into power in the early 2000s, and he wants to see he wants to see Russia restored to its former glory. So he wants to see things like Ukraine and Azerbaijan and the nation of Georgia and Latvia and Belarus and all these different nations be in his sphere of influence, and he can control them. But NATO is a threat to that. And he also doesn't want NATO on their border because just like we saw with the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 60s, he doesn't want missiles put close to his border because he wants to make sure he's positioned well. There's a lot of geopolitics going on from two ideologically antipodal societies, and that leads to tension. That always has between Russia and the West, and it has for the last 100 years or so, ever since the revolution. So here's the point. NATO said that we will make no guarantees that we will not bring Ukraine into NATO. That's pretty much what NATO has come out and said. We will make no promises, and Putin is demanding that NATO makes that promise that Ukraine is never to join NATO. They won't do that. So that's a lot of where this conflict is coming from. This has been ongoing for several years. Now what Putin is doing is he's put about 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border, positioning, looking like he's going to invade, but he's probably not going to be honest with you. What just happened yesterday is Biden came out and ordered the Pentagon to send 8,500 troops over towards NATO allies. There's some misinformation going around in the news media right now. They are not sending 8,500 troops to Ukraine. Those troops are going to, I believe it's Romania, Poland, and Germany. There are different bases over there. A lot of them are being pulled out of a base in North Carolina. So we're bolstering our garrison in Europe, in the European theater, basically is what's going on. That is just a move to kind of position and show Putin, hey, we're not playing around here. We're going to defend ourselves if you attack us. Here's my take. Russia's not going to invade because if they do, multiple things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to get locked out of SWIFT, more than likely, which is the international banking system. That would collapse their entire economy. Russia's economy is actually growing very quickly right now. They've invested $100 billion in natural gas refining in Siberia. They've invested billions of dollars in new ice-breaking natural gas shipping container ships that are able to break through ice and go around the Bering Strait and go and deliver natural gas to East Asia. They've done so much with their natural gas industry, and by the way, their biggest consumer of their natural gas, which is one of their largest exporters, is Europe. So if there was a war to break out in the European theater, then that would be a very, very bad thing for the Russian economy. Russia would take a much larger hit than NATO would, but what Russia's doing right now is saying, okay, we're going to position as if a war is going to break out. And then when we position like that, then what's going to happen is that's going to scare the markets in America. It's going to scare the markets in Britain. It's going to cause a market drop. And if we look at my chart, we can see that that's exactly what happened. The SPY is down significantly over the course of time that this news has been coming around. January 4th, the SPY, S&P 500 ETF Trust over on CBOE BZX was up at 480 points, dropped down to 420. Nice. It pulled back 60 points, 12% in 21 days, and is still currently down 6% on open today at 451 points. So what's the point? The point is Russia wants to position itself in a way to get the best terms and to try and force NATO into making a promise that Ukraine will never join NATO. That's what Russia's trying to do here, and it has absolutely nothing to do with cryptocurrency. But the impact that it's having on cryptocurrency is that there is a looming threat of conflict in Eastern Europe, which theoretically could, in a very, very bad situation, escalate into something extremely dangerous for the world, and that's scaring the market. So here's how this affects Bitcoin. Number one, uncertainty in traditional markets overflows into cryptocurrency markets. We've always seen that during March of 2020, when the stock market dropped substantially as a result of the news virus. The same thing happened on Bitcoin. Whenever we see a major drop on the traditional markets, we end up seeing the same thing happen in cryptocurrency. So that's number one, how this is affecting this. Number two, the way that this will affect this in the long run is that if there is a conflict, this will actually help Bitcoin to mature. And I'll explain exactly how, and then I want to hear Tim's final thoughts on this. The way that I think that this is going to actually help Bitcoin as an ecosystem mature is that Bitcoin had never been through a global flu, as we saw in 2020 and 2021. Never happened. In the history of Bitcoin, we had never seen a global flu, if you will. And now we've seen what Bitcoin does during that. It rallies 700%. So Bitcoin can live through that. We've never seen at this point what happens when a major conflict breaks out somewhere in the world. If that does occur, it's going to be terrible, and we're going to be praying for them every single day for it to cease and for nobody to get hurt. We do not want that to happen whatsoever. We want peace, and we're very thankful for the peace that we have in the world right now. There's still conflict, but we're thankful for the peace that we do have. We want that to stay. But if it does happen, here's what's going to happen. It's going to prove to the retail that, okay, Bitcoin not only can survive a global flu, it can also survive conflict. And in fact, people are going to realize, wait a second, okay, the stock market's crashing, but Bitcoin actually performed pretty well during this time. So one, it's having an impact on it because there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the market. That's trickling over into the sentiment on Bitcoin. And two, it is going to help Bitcoin to mature because it's going to allow people to see how Bitcoin responds to these times. Tim.
Yes.
Do you think Russia's actually going to do it?
No, I do not. And this is ultimately what I think people need to hear, because everything that Jebb just said was phenomenal. But I guarantee there are a lot of people sitting here saying, at the end of the day, I just want to know, is Bitcoin going to go up, or is it going to go down? Is it going to go sideways? Is it going to go backwards? Is it going to go, you know? There are about 543 different options of Bitcoin price based off of what we are going to see here over the next couple of weeks. But what I want people to know is no matter what happens, there is still positive price action coming for Bitcoin. Because even if, and again, I didn't want anyone to think earlier that that was necessarily my take, that this is going to lead to Bitcoin becoming gold. But the fact that that's a discussion out there needs to be represented, that, hey, there are some people with that belief. So at best case scenario, probably not likely, best case scenario, Bitcoin benefits from the whole thing because the shift begins to become, all right, is Bitcoin actually a hedge against inflation and is being seen as a stable asset more like gold? Is that going to happen? Probably not. But that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's seen as just like everything else. And occasionally when we see a war, there's usually about a 15% drop. But here's what happens. It's a very short drop. At the longest, you're going to see that drop be down for about a month before it bounces right back up to where it was beforehand. That's if we actually see bullets fired in this whole encounter. Even if that happens and there's a drop, it will rally right back, and usually we end up seeing the markets outperform and lead into a rally. So no matter what happens, I'm definitely aware, if you are in a trade, if you're in a long right now, you are sitting here watching every second because you're like, I do not want to be liquidated. This is a good place to get into a trade. I don't want the price to go down anymore. Why do we keep having things come in and influence Bitcoin to the downside? But if you're just a hodler, if you're just a DCA, or this could be, there's really not that many options that are going to lead to too much bearish action here. Even if there's short-term bearish action, we have seen historical precedents for actual upside in the price of these things. It just might take a small dip in the beginning. Expect it to be somewhere in the middle. That's ultimately where I am. I don't think that there's actually going to be any conflict. I really think, now I'm getting into the Putin stuff, I really think Putin's just doing all of this to scare Western
bluffing.
society. And he knows that simply putting 130,000 militia on that border is causing the West to freak out and to pause. And when you pause and you freak out, your economy starts to trickle a little bit and it starts to have some negative aspects. That is simply all it is. Even if you read the analysis being done by Ukrainians and Europeans, it's really easy to read American news and hear what Biden's thinking and hear what the White House is thinking. But when you read what the analysts in Europe are saying, they are saying this is a bluff. He is just trying to scare us, and he's trying to play chess with us. And unfortunately, there's a lot of politicians who only want to play checkers.
I like that. That's very, very accurate. And instead of playing checkers, basically what they're doing is they're like a toddler, and they're like, hey, look, there's a piece. That's what the politicians do most of their day. I wish they knew how to play chess. They don't. I really wish we had some good politicians, but we don't. That's okay. Term limits would be a great idea. But anyway, here's the deal. I don't think Russia's going to invade. If they do, then it's going to suck. It really is. But I don't think it would escalate any farther. I don't think that NATO would join in. I think that Russia would probably move in and then move out. They would move in, replace the government, and move out. And it would be a very, very bad thing. But at the end of the day, the thing I want to point out here with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is that Everything that happens to Bitcoin is actually a good thing in the long run. Not a good thing, I should say. It is a positive development for the maturity of Bitcoin. It helps Bitcoin to mature. That's a better way to say it. There is no way, shape, or form that any kind of conflict in Ukraine is a good thing. It's a very terrible thing. But it will help Bitcoin to mature. Going through hardship helps you to mature. And if Bitcoin sees, and if more importantly, the market sees how Bitcoin reacts to an event like this, then that is going to help Bitcoin to mature and for people's perspective of Bitcoin to mature. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, you should definitely consider subscribing because we're trying to help you become financially free in these cryptocurrency markets. And also, consider following us on Twitter @CryptoJebb for more updates on the price of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Peace.